got 100 steps to go. Tonight I'll make it 99. By rayrae118. Chapter 13. At 9 o'clock precisely, Harry was waiting in the entrance hall of Lion's Castle, ready for the new arrivals. The rest of the group was down in the kitchen, eating breakfast, as three separate beings popped into existence in front of them. Daphne barely restrained herself from flinging herself at Harry, but she was so relieved to see that he was indeed all right. Luna did not feel the need to hold herself back, and immediately launched herself at her boyfriend, hugging him tightly. Blaise was equally relieved, and, after a moment, they all greeted Harry. Harry scuffed his foot against the floor.
"I'm sorry we didn't take you with us yesterday,"
he said softly.
"I wanted to, but Voldemort was heading right for us, and we couldn't wait any longer. I couldn't find you guys."
Blaise shook his head.
"We're all fine. And you did the right thing, Harry. You had to get out."
Harry looked a little better as Daphne and Luna also indicated their understanding, and they headed to the kitchen to join the rest for the morning meal. As they walked, Harry filled the newcomers in on what was going on with them, as well as what he knew about the multi-pronged attack Voldemort had carried out the day before.
"I'm meeting with Aunt Minerva at noon today to get an update,"
he told them as they entered the kitchen. There were tearful greetings all around, as everyone was happy to see Blaise, Daphne and Luna. Yesterday's fight had scared them all. The rest of the morning passed quietly, as they congregated in the library, reading, researching, anything to take their minds off of things, such as their worry about their family members. At 11:45, Harry gave Ginny a kiss, and left to flew to Potter Manor. The first thing he did when he arrived was add the manor as a location on his portkey ring. He then took a seat in one of the comfortable chairs in the sitting room, and waited. At 12 o'clock precisely, the fire flared up, and Minerva stepped through, holding a large carry case. She brushed herself off briefly, and then strode forward to grasp Harry in a tight hug.
"Oh, thank Merlin,"
she breathed, clutching him with all her strength. Harry gripped her back just as tightly.
"I'm all right,"
he assured her. Minerva nodded slightly, and then stepped back. She looked down at the case she was carrying, before passing it to Harry with a small smile.
"Hermione and Ginny should be happy to know that I managed to get Crookshanks and Selene. I thought they would want their pets with them."
Harry took the case with a grin, knowing how relieved the two girls would be. The two took a seat, and Harry told her that he and his friends were planning on continuing their quest. That they would stay in touch, but they had to do this alone. They didn't want too many people involved, in case the wrong person were to catch wind of it. Minerva understood. She didn't like it, but she understood. "You will all take care of yourselves, correct?" she asked sternly, giving him a look no one else would have been able to duplicate. Harry nodded soberly.
"We'll be as safe as we can be. What I really wanted to find out today, though, was the situation everywhere else. What happened at the Ministry, and the alley."
Minerva sighed, looking down.
"The building was lost.
Amelia sent out an evacuation as she got out,
and everyone abandoned the building to the Death Eaters. Arthur, Frank, Alice, Kingsley and Tonks are all fine, as is Cedric. There were some deaths, but we don't have full details. Amelia and Sirius left early this morning to meet with the senior staff at a secure location that they set up as a safe house earlier this year."
She shook her head sadly.
"Rufus Scrimgeour was killed, as was..."
She looked at Harry, her eyes sad.
"Harry, Percy didn't make it."
Harry gasped, covering his mouth with his hands. Across the bond, he felt Ginny's wave of pain and horror, but couldn't attempt to comfort her just yet.
He was too caught up in his own shock. "Oh,"
he whispered. Minerva rested a hand on his shoulder.
"He pushed Amelia out of the way of a killing curse. He died a hero, Harry. That much is certain."
Harry nodded shakily.
"Ginny, I'm so sorry."
He felt Ginny's grief and winced. A moment later she got herself under control.
Just Concentrate on getting information now, Harry. We'll talk later.
Harry withdrew himself from the conversation and turned back to Minerva.
What about the others?
He was almost afraid of the answer. Minerva took a deep breath.
Most of our group is at McGonagall Castle. Tonks brought her parents over, since our wards are stronger. Amelia and Sirius decided to open up the Bones estate to any Ministry employees who need a place to stay low. And they're staying with us. Sirius, Remus, Fred, George, Bill and Fleur were at the alley, and reported it to be in shambles, but they were all unharmed.
She smiled slightly.
Bill mentioned this morning that his employers want a report on your status. As he put it, they told him when he left yesterday afternoon to make sure that his friends were unharmed.
Harry chuckled. Being on good terms with the goblins was certainly a good thing.
Minerva sighed. The alley is a mess, and I am certain people won't be shopping there for a while. Many people were injured or killed in the fight. Some people are missing. Missing?
Harry questioned. Minerva shook her head.
Sirius said that Ollivander was drugged from his shop by Death Eaters, and has not been seen since. Harry's eyes widened. What could they want with him?
He asked. Minerva pursed her lips.
We can only guess.
Harry nodded, but he had a feeling that whenever they did find out, it wouldn't be good.
In the meantime, I will let everyone know that you are well, and that the others are fine. Is there any specific message you would like me to carry?
Minerva asked. Harry bit his lip.
Tell Morley and Arthur how sorry I am for their loss. And Bill and the twins as well.
Minerva nodded, and Harry looked at the floor.
Tell everyone that we miss them, and that we'll be careful.
Minerva nodded again and gave Harry a hug. They stood up together, and Harry walked a few feet forward with his pseudo-aunt, and stopped when they reached the mantel.
I'll try and write at least once a week,
Harry assured her.
And I'll keep you keyed into the wards here, just in case. If something comes up, and you need someone else here, let me know. I know we're probably being overly cautious, but...
Minerva shook her head, cutting him off.
I understand, Harry. Caution is a good thing, even if it seems you are being paranoid. I'm glad you're taking precautions. I will expect to hear from you soon, alright?
Harry nodded.
I'll make sure to send you an update by next week. If something comes up beforehand, use the medallion I gave you last year to get my attention. If you need to meet, let me know through the medallion. Or just tell me what's going on.
Minerva smiled as she felt the medallion through her dress. She never took it off, and it was good to know she had a way of getting in touch with Harry in an emergency if need be. After one more hug, Minerva flew back to McGonagall Castle, and Harry collected the carry case containing the 2 cats, before he used his ring to get him back to Lyons Castle. His friends met him at the entrance hall, looking confused.
Harry, what's going on?
Ron asked worriedly. They had all been startled out of their reading when Ginny had gasped loudly and rushed out of the room. Blaise, Daphne and Luna were more alarmed than the rest, not knowing anything about why she may have done such a thing. The others had come to the conclusion that Minerva had told Harry something to upset her. Harry looked at them each, grimly.
Let's go to the library,
he said softly. Hermione gave a small shriek when she saw the case Harry was carrying. Harry! Do you have... Harry glanced down at his hands and started. He had actually forgotten he was carrying the case. He set it down and let the 2 cats out.
Aunt Minerva got them back to the castle. She thought you and Ginny would like them back.
Hermione scooped up Crookshanks and cradled him against her chest, a few tears leaking from her eyes. She had been so worried for him. Selene looked around at the teenagers, stretched, and then bounded off to find the human that belonged to her. Ginny joined them as they entered the massive library, her eyes red as she cuddled Selene close to her. Harry put an arm around her shoulders. As they walked,
I'm so sorry, Gin, mentally.
Ginny nodded slightly.
I can't believe it. Her mental voice was soft. We just got him back. They sat down, and Harry turned to Ron. His emerald eyes turned somber. Ron. Ron's face drained of blood. No, he whispered. Oh. Harry looked down. Percy. Ron gasped and the others looked shocked. How? Hermione asked softly, wrapping an arm around Ron's back, pulling him close to her in an effort to comfort him. Harry bit his lip. He pushed Amelia out of the way of a killing curse. They all absorbed the information, reeling from the blow. Of course they knew they were already casualties in the war. Daphne had lost her mother. Ron and Ginny had lost uncles. Harry and Susan had lost their parents, as had Neville for a while. But it still hurt, and none of them wanted to lose another loved one. Susan shifted in her seat. I'm so sorry, guys. If there's anything I can do. Ron looked back at Harry. Tell us everything McGonagall said. Was anyone else? Harry shook his head. From what she said, our circle was mostly unharmed. Rufus Scrimgeour, the DMLE head, was killed, and Ollivander is missing. The alley is in shambles, and the Ministry building is lost. Aunt Amelia's all right, Susan whispered, hope shining in her eyes. Harry nodded, smiling slightly. Aunt Minerva said that Amelia and Sirius were meeting with the senior officials at the safe house this morning, and that they could still operate in the shadows if need be. The Ministry hasn't completely fallen, just the building. She also said that Sirius and Amelia opened up the Bones estate to house any Ministry employees who might need somewhere safe to stay. Susan nodded, smiling a little. That sounded like her aunt. I can't believe what the wizarding world has turned to, Blaise commented softly. In one day, thousands of people have been killed, injured or forced into hiding. How many more will die before this war is over? Harry's eyes hardened. We had better do everything we can to stop Voldemort before it comes to that, then. He looked at each of them in turn. I can't do this alone, and I don't want to. You're all here because together we can stop this. It's the only way.
Ginny nodded firmly. Find the Horcruxes, destroy them, kill Voldemort. We can do this. We have to do this. But how can we destroy the Horcruxes now? Neville asked. The sword is still in Dumbledore's office at Hogwarts. Harry shook his head.
One step at a time. The Horcruxes we have are safe now, so let's deal with finding the others, and work how to get the sword out.
They agreed, and decided to head up to the kitchen for lunch. Harry fell back with Ron, gesturing for Hermione to go on ahead. She did so with one last, helpless look at her boyfriend, before leaving them alone. Harry waited for Ron to say something, knowing that his red-haired friend had come to him.
After a few moments, Ron swallowed. We always teased him. He was so studious, and he didn't like to play Quidditch, or really do anything besides read. What if...
Harry shook his head.
He knew that you all loved him. He came back, remember? He realized that he had been wrong, and he wanted to be a part of the family again. He's a hero, Ron. He gave his life to protect Amelia. You can't get much more heroic than that.
Ron nodded, looking a little better, as they joined the rest of their friends. Snape tried to ignore the apprehension curling in his gut as he walked up the path to Hogwarts, the castle looming imposingly over him. He had acted the part of the dutiful Death Eater, and responded immediately to the summons of the Dark Lord. But for some reason, he couldn't get rid of the feeling that something was wrong. The day before, he had vacated the premises as soon as he heard of the battle taking place by the train. He couldn't be seen helping the light side, but he wouldn't fight with Voldemort either. The safest and best thing for him to do, it seemed, was leave. But this morning. He had felt the call of his former master, and had responded, knowing the consequences of not doing so. The door opened as he approached, and Lucius sneered at him. "Severus, he's waiting." Snape nodded curtly and brushed past Malfoy. He noted the younger Malfoy brooding in a corner as he entered the Great Hall, which Voldemort had apparently decided to turn into his new throne room. He had previously used the Great Hall at Malfoy Manor, where Snape had managed to hide the Weasley twins' listening device, which was no small feat, getting it in place without anyone noticing. But with the Dark Lord's conquering of Hogwarts, it seemed he had decided to move court to the castle. Voldemort observed the potions master neutrally, his red eyes gleaming. "Severus!" Snape approached the Dark Lord cautiously, hiding his unease as he knelt.
"You called, my lord?"
Voldemort inclined his head. "Many things have not added up lately, Severus." His left hand came up and began stroking Nagini's head as the snake curled around her master. "Why did Dumbledore's order become so much more knowledgeable these past months?" "Yes, something seems to be off." Snape stopped himself from swallowing, a lump appearing in his throat as he felt the danger looming.
"My lord, I cannot answer this question."
"Can you not?" Voldemort looked at him closely. "I have considered the possibilities many times, but only one scenario seems to fit. You, Severus, have sown your seeds on both sides. You say you are loyal to me, yet you attended meetings with the old fool and call yourself loyal to the light as well. So, which is it?" Snape stiffened.
"My lord knows I only serve him."
Voldemort almost smiled. "We shall see." And then he was casting the Cruciatus Curse on Snape with a vengeance. The potions master fell to the ground, twitching and writhing in pain. Voldemort held him under the curse for several minutes before he lifted it. "Tell me, Severus, how long has it been since you switched sides? How much did you tell the old fool about our plans?" Severus let out half groan, half a whimper, and Voldemort's lips curled into a sneer, before he ruthlessly cast the curse again. 4 more times. Snape was subjected to the worst curse imaginable. By the time the Dark Lord had lost interest, Snape was nearly unconscious, and certainly didn't have the ability to fight back. Voldemort cast him aside with a flick of a wand, and turned to the two Malfoys. "Clean up this mess," he ordered before sweeping out of the room. Lucius and Draco used their wands to cart Snape's body outside, sneering all the while and expressing their disappointment that such a promising half-blood had turned out to be just another piece of filth. Snape feigned unconsciousness, but knew he would need to act quickly if he was to have any chance, as he could feel the black of blissful oblivion creeping in. Halfway down the path towards the gate, beyond which led to the road to Hogsmeade, the Malfoys dropped Snape to the ground. Draco's eyes gleamed in the moonlight, eager to prove his worth to the Dark Lord. Lucius casually cast a cutting curse that was caught on Snape's shoulder. That was when the potions master cried. He reached out swiftly and knocked Lucius to the ground, standing up with a bit of a challenge, but he forced his legs under him as he grabbed Lucius's dropped wand and stunned Draco. He may have been weak, but his stunner still knocked Draco back a good 5 feet, where he crumpled to the hard stone path. Snape quickly limped towards the gate, knowing he didn't have much time before the alarm was sounded. Death Eaters pouring out of the front entrance as Snape passed the boundary, and without wasting any more time, he concentrated harder than he had when he was 16 and just learning how to operate, and willed his body to appear at his desired destination. Minerva was recounting her conversation with Harry that evening, for the second time, as Sirius, Amelia and Kingsley had only just returned from their meeting with the senior officials, when a siren blared through the castle, causing everyone in residence to quickly make their way to the entrance hall, wands in hand. Minerva's wand raised slightly, pointed to the doors, as she looked at everyone gathered around her. It was a large group, consisting of herself, Sirius, Remus, Amelia, Kingsley, Ted, Andromeda, Tonks, Augusta, Bill, Fleur, Fred, George, Arthur, Molly, Frank, and Alice. "Someone has breached the wards," she informed them. Frank's eyes widened. "An attack?" he asked, glancing at the closed and bolted doors leading out to the grounds. Minerva shook her head slightly. "That alarm indicates that if it is someone who is allowed access, but not on the list of those keyed into the wards." She turned to the doors and waved her wand. Noiselessly, the bolt lifted, and the doors opened. Minerva frowned, venturing outside cautiously. A short distance from the doors was what looked to be a pile of clothing. She moved forward and bent down next to the pile. It shifted and groaned, and Minerva reared back in surprise. Suddenly, Sirius and Remus were at her side, Frank and Alice not far behind.
"Minerva!"
Sirius asked, tightening the grip on his wand. Minerva glanced at him, and then reached out to prod the pile, turning it over. They all gasped at the nearly unconscious potions master. Minerva quickly called for several house elves to take him inside, but the man caught her arm before she could stand up. His obsidian eyes were half closed, but rimmed with red. He looked at her in a way that had her uncertain if he actually knew where he was.
"Dark Lord!"
He coughed before his eyes closed, and he lapsed into unconsciousness. 3 house elves moved in and brought him to an empty room, while another went down to the potion storeroom to gather healing potions. Suddenly, Minerva realized that they didn't have a healer. Sirius, however, was one step ahead.
"I'm going to get Narcissa, Minerva. Will you add her to the wards within the next few minutes? She'll be able to help."
Minerva nodded as Sirius ran to the flow and disappeared in a flash of green fire. When he returned 5 minutes later, the group was still in the entrance hall, waiting anxiously. Narcissa trailed behind her cousin, her normally pale face completely ashen. Severus had helped her get free of the Dark Lord, and of her husband. She would do whatever she could to ensure his health. Sirius led her to Snape's room, and then left her alone to work, with a house elf on call to fetch anything she needed, before he returned to the others. It was over an hour before Narcissa reappeared, tired and shaking slightly, but not giving off the defeated air of having lost a patient. The rest had taken seats near the staircase, but they all stood up quickly as the woman entered. Narcissa took a moment to marvel at their anxious expressions. If only Severus knew how much this group cared about him! Before she smiled slightly. "He's out of danger," she informed them. There was a collective sigh of relief. Narcissa descended the last few steps. "He'll be sore for a while yet, but fortunately, he should escape permanent damage." "What happened?" Tonks asked. Narcissa bit her lip, glancing at the Longbottoms briefly.
"He suffered a prolonged exposure to the Cruciatus curse."
Frank and Alice inhaled sharply, grasping each other's hands tightly, while the others looked at them sympathetically. Narcissa sighed.
"His mind appears to be sound, though his limbs will be shaking for a while. Additionally, he has some bruises from thrashing around under the curse, and a cutting curse to the shoulder, which missed anything vital. For the time being, he is unconscious. I'm not sure when he'll wake up, but the good news is that I am certain he will."
Sirius smiled and guided her towards the kitchen.
"Thank you, Narcissa. Why don't you get something to eat, and then rest yourself? You look tired."
Narcissa glared at him half-heartedly. "You should know better than to say that to a woman, Sirius. If I weren't so exhausted, I would hex you." The women all laughed, while the men smiled slightly. Despite her words, Narcissa put up no fight as the house elves plied her with food. The others all snacked a little, still thinking about the man currently unconscious upstairs. A few minutes later, Sirius told Narcissa that he would return to the safe house and collect her things. When she protested, he put his foot down.
"Those wards may be sound, but I would prefer you stay here for the time being. You'll be of more help nearby to take care of Severus, and keep him from getting out of bed before he's ready. You could also use the potions lab here, to brew potions that we'll probably need in the near future."
Narcissa sighed but assented, and Sirius left the room. The others all drifted off after a while, until Narcissa was nearly alone at the table. She glanced down a few seats to the stragglers, and swallowed. She hated apologies, but if anyone deserved one, it was the duo sitting a few seats down.
I would like to apologise for what my sister and brother-in-law did to your family,
she said quietly, causing Frank and Alice to halt their conversation and turn to her in shock. Narcissa looked down at her nearly empty plate, shamed at what Bellatrix had descended to. Frank furrowed his brow, but it was Alice's kind voice that raised the proud woman's gaze to meet theirs. Frank and I believe that everyone is responsible for their own actions. Narcissa, you had no control over what Bellatrix did. We don't hold you accountable, so don't hold yourself accountable. Narcissa sniffed, amazed at these people. If it were her, she would be blaming the whole family for what they had done. Andromeda had just entered in time to hear Alice's response, and she hurried forward to support her sister.
Sissy, you can't blame yourself. Believe me, it took me a long time to stop feeling guilty over what my family had done. But Alice is right. You are your own person.
Narcissa leaned into the embrace, letting out all of the fear, anger, and guilt that had been building up.
I'm so sorry, she sobbed. I should have listened to you all those years ago. I never should have married him. You were right.
Andromeda soothed her patiently, knowing that she needed to get all of this out. A pointed look at Frank and Alice had the auras departing, leaving the sisters alone. After 5 minutes, Narcissa's sobs slowed, and Andromeda knew that she was nearly asleep, so she gently manoeuvred her sister up and practically carried her to the second floor, putting her in an empty room near Snape's, before taking off her shoes and socks but leaving her clothed, before she dimmed the lamp and left, leaving the door open just a crack behind her. As she headed in the direction of the library, she felt as if a weight had been lifted. For so many years, she had been shunned as the black daughter that had dared to marry a Muggleborn. Her sisters had stopped talking to her. Her parents had disowned her. But after all these years, she had Narcissa back. She sat down next to her husband and pulled a book towards her, smiling broadly and ignoring the inquisitive look she was being given. Nothing could dampen her mood right now. Harry knew the only thing his friends could do was take it week by week, but he had no idea before now how long a week really was. Side note, as someone who was unemployed for 4 years, thank you COVID, that's relatable. They spent their time researching and trying to narrow down locations, but it just seemed like busy work, something to keep them occupied because they couldn't do anything else. Harry had just tried to be grateful that they at least had somewhere safe and comfortable to sleep. They could have been spending this time camping outside. The brutal United Kingdom weather definitely made them all thankful for the warm castle they were staying in. Harry knew that not nearly as many bedrooms were in use as they should be, but he didn't say anything. He had seen Susan and Neville unpacking in the same room, and he was aware that Blaise and Luna were sharing as well. He trusted his friends to be safe and responsible, and he wouldn't regulate how they spent their nights. Ron and Hermione were still sleeping in separate rooms, but Harry knew that his oldest friends were much shyer about their relationship than the others, and didn't judge them for that. Ron and Hermione were keen on taking their relationship slow, because they wanted it to last, and didn't want to rush into anything they weren't quite ready for. Harry, Ron, and Neville were pleasantly surprised and relieved to wake up the day after Harry met with Minerva to find all of their owls waiting for them in the dining room, each one wearing similarly smug expressions on their faces. All 3 owls appeared to be very proud of the fact that they had found their owner, even behind the impressive walls surrounding the castle. The boys weren't complaining, however, as each of them had been worried about their pets. Hermione went out 2 days after Harry's meeting with Minerva, using glamour charms, to get a copy of the Prophet. Just by looking at the front page, they could tell that Voldemort was officially in control. The attacks he had carried out on Hogwarts, the Ministry, and Diagon Alley were reported on as a resound defeat of the oppressive regime and the uprising of a new and noble leader. Herbert Yaxley had been named as the new Minister of Magic, and though many of those who had previously been employed at the Ministry had gone into hiding, the building was functioning again. Those who had fewer ties to the lighter side, or were pureblood or half-blood, had returned to work, though Arthur, Frank, and Alice made no move to do so. They knew it wouldn't end well for them, as all three were known members of the light side. Tonks and Kingsley were likewise deciding it would be prudent for them to stay out of sight for the time being. There wasn't much information of value, but Harry didn't expect it since Voldemort was most likely controlling the paper. He didn't make note of the restricted access to the alley, with the hours that people could shop being severely limited, as well as the Muggle-born Registration Commission. They were all outraged at the article that called for all so-called Muggle-borns to submit themselves for questioning by the end of the week so that they could be interrogated on how they got their magic, since it clearly wasn't through blood. Harry doubted that any of those who submitted themselves would be heard from again. When they got stir-crazy sitting around the library, they explored the castle. Everything was in pretty good shape, considering no one had lived there for centuries. Harry spoke with the house elves and discovered that they had used preservation charms on the furniture, as well as spells that kept dust from settling and pests from invading. Harry was very impressed and thanked them wholeheartedly for keeping his family home in excellent condition. All of the house elves were crying with pleasure and immediately popped away to ensure they continued to do their master proud. It was impressive how well stocked the entire castle was. Even beyond the charms protecting the furniture, the kitchen was completely full, and there were full closets in each room. A few transfigurations had them looking like clothes that a typical teenager of this century would wear. A few days later, Blaise, Daphne, and Luna pulled him aside and asked if they could get their families to a safer location. Harry bit his lip as he considered.
"You don't think that your wards are safe enough?"
he asked curiously. Daphne glared at him. "My home has already been broken into once before. I won't lose any more family to that bastard!" Harry winced and rested a hand on her shoulder.
"I'm sorry, Daph. Send your families a letter with Mimsy. Have them pack a bag and I'll get them to McGonagall Castle. There should be more than enough room there."
They all nodded and disappeared to do just that. The day after that, Harry sent them a letter telling them to flew to Potter Manor shortly after noon in 2 days so that they could get to McGonagall Castle safely. He then sent Minerva a letter asking her to meet him at the same time. 2 days later, Harry left the others practicing in the dueling room and flew to his ancestral home. The first thing he did was add the Greengrasses, Madame Zabini, and Mr. Lovegood to the access list, before he settled in to wait the remaining few minutes for Minerva to show up. He stood up quickly when Minerva stepped out of the fireplace, and her grim expression clued Harry in that something was wrong. He had to sit down again when she told him about Snape.
Is he all right?"
Harry asked worriedly once she had finished. Minerva sighed and also took a seat.
"He's still unconscious," she informed him. "Narcissa has barely left his side, and she is keeping him asleep for now to try to heal some of the nerve damage the Cruciatus curse caused. We don't know everything until he awakes, but Narcissa tells us that it isn't wise to attempt to do so unless he is further along in the healing process."
Harry let out a shaky breath.
"Please, keep me informed,"
he said, eyes full of worry for the snarky man. Minerva nodded and attempted to smile, before she moved on to more news, including the taboo that had been placed on the Dark Lord's name.
"I believe powerful wards, such as goblin wards, will block it, but if you venture out in public, do not use that name," Minerva warned. "It will cause Death Eaters to be able to locate to your location."
Harry nodded shakily, making a mental note to not use the name when they ventured beyond Lion's Castle, before he told her of his promise to house his friends' families at McGonagall Castle. Minerva raised an eyebrow.
"I know that they need somewhere safe, Harry, but I'm not sure you understand how full the castle really is. We are currently housing pretty much everyone in our circle. Augusta, Frank, Alice don't want to go home yet. I believe what happened at the end of the last war has sharpened their fears. Amelia and Sirius have opened their home to anyone who needs somewhere safe to hide, so they don't really have anywhere else to go for the time being. And the Weasleys believe their home is too well known a risk to stay there.
Harry nodded. He understood, but he also knew he would not take no for an answer.
None of them have wards as good as ours, and I promised Blaise, Daphne and Luna that I would make sure they were safe. Daphne can't lose another family member. They'll be here in a few minutes.
Minerva sighed and shaking her head slightly.
All right, Harry. They can stay with us for as long as they need. We'll manage.
Harry snorted.
It's not like the castle is lacking in space.
Minerva rolled her eyes, but had to agree. Her ancestral home was rather spacious. It was just a little too crowded for her, but she wouldn't turn it away anyone if they needed help. Their conversation was cut off by the fire flaring up, as Madame Zabini stepped through. She brushed herself off briskly before greeting Harry and Minerva.
I thank you for your willingness to open your home.
Druella smiled thinly at Minerva.
I know my son worries,
especially after what happened last year. Minerva nodded, taking the hand Madame Zabini offered.
I am always willing to lend a hand to those in need.
Druella smiled to Harry. While I cannot claim to understand why my son felt the need to leave on some adventure, I trust him to take care of himself, and I know he would not disappear unless he felt there was no other option. Harry smiled and shook his friend's mother's hand.
It is a pleasure to see you again, Madame Zabini. I apologize for all the inconvenience, but I promise we will do our best to ensure Blaise's safety.
Druella nodded sharply.
You will do your best to ensure all of your safety. We will manage. But whatever you are doing, it must be dangerous. And important. For Blaise to be so vague about it. I trust my son, Lord Potter. I also trust you, so do not make a liar out of me.
Harry nodded quickly, and then stepped forward to greet Luna's father as he stepped through the flue, and a moment after that Cyrus and Astoria arrived at the manor. After the greetings they all left with Minerva, and promised that Harry would try to keep in touch with them, before he was left alone in his family home once more. After removing everyone but himself and Minerva from the access list, Harry returned to Lion's Castle. Harry's friends were shocked to learn of the taboo, and knew that they would need to remind themselves not to use the name in public, since they were accustomed to calling the megalomaniac by his moniker. They all knew that they were safe behind the walls of the castle because they had used the name multiple times and nothing had happened, but they would need to use caution everywhere else. Ron surprised them all by chuckling once Harry had finished speaking. When they all looked at him, he shrugged. Sorry, I was just thinking about how McGonagall must feel like she's running an inn or something. How many people are staying with her? Harry had to let out a snort as he agreed. A lot, he replied. Your parents have moved in, plus Sirius and Amelia, the Toggses, Fred and George, Bill and Fleur, Kingsley, Snape, Narcissa, Frank and Alice, and Augusta, and now the Greengrasses, Madame Zabini, and Mr. Lovegood. He shook his head slightly. Aunt Minerva also said that the Bones estate has basically turned into a giant housing unit for ministry employees in hiding. The building is back up and running, but it's just so Voldemort can pretend he's in control. Harry, he is in control, Susan had to point out. Harry shook his head. He thinks he is. And most everyone else probably does too. But think about it. We're still here. And we're not locked up or dead. And we've got the knowledge of how to end the war. I'd say we're the ones in control. They all looked startled, but after a moment, what he had said sunk in, and they had to agree. Harry raised an eyebrow. So, now that that's cleared up, let's get back to work, shall we? They all nodded, and returned to their dueling practice. End of chapter. Hi guys, hope you enjoyed this. Okay, the outro is going to be short because my throat hurts, but I like how they're setting things up quickly to really turn the war against Voldemort, you know. Everyone's doing their best to keep safe, but also keep in touch. I like that the house elves can just quickly pop the messages across. I always thought they should have done that in the book, Why starve yourselves in the middle of the outside when you have a house elf who has the ability to cast things like warming charms and bring you good food? I mean, come on. It would have really helped with Ron's locket fixation thing. Anyway, my throat hurts by now, so you guys know the drill. Like, comment, and subscribe. Yada, yada, yada. Love you guys. Bye.